Hey guys, it's Mr. Grady. We're going to go ahead and go through our quiz corrections for our quiz over cones and cylinders. A couple things to remember. First of all, you only have to correct your missed questions. Second of all, the first time you watch the video, you're not writing anything down, you're just looking for your mistake. So the whole first time you watch your question, you're looking for your mistake, then you go back and rewatch it once you've actually found what your mistake is. Third, you're going to show all work on your left column, and then on the right column, you're going to have your specific explanation. So if your explanation is, oh, I got it wrong, or I didn't multiply, that's not going to work. It has to be specific. So what did you not multiply? What did you get wrong? So please be specific as you go through it. So if you missed question one, we're going to go over question one real fast. And it was kind of tricky because if we look at this, we have a cone. So we've done volume of cone before. And for this particular volume of cone, we were missing the height. So what you had to do was go ahead and draw in our height. You had to find that. And remember we talked about in class the other day, this actually becomes a right triangle. So here's our triangle here. When we do this, that means that if the left side of our triangle is 12 and 1/10 yards, that means the hypotenuse over here of the triangle is also 12 and 1/10 yards. So we're given side C, because that's 12 and 1/10, and we have A or B over here, which is 5, but we're missing our other leg, so we're missing B. So in this case, again, we're doing Pythagorean theorem. So we start off our Pythagorean theorem. Remember, it's A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A, we said, was 5, so 5 squared plus B squared equals 12 and 1/10 squared, because that's what C was. We're going to go ahead and do our multiplication now. So 5 times 5 is 25, plus B squared, and 12 and 1/10 squared is 146 and 41 hundredths. Okay? So now we want to get B squared by itself, so we're going to take our 25 and move it to the other side. We know to do that, we're going to be subtracting. So we're going to subtract 25 from our right side. Again, I lined up my decimals to make my subtraction easier. And when I subtract this out, I know that 41 minus 0 is 41, 6 minus 5 is 1, 4 minus 2 is 2, and 1 minus 0 is 1. So I have 121 and 41 hundredths equals B squared. The last thing I would need to do is square root, because I know the inverse of squaring a number is square rooting. So I would have to finish this up by square rooting 121 and 41 hundredths, and that's going to tell me what the height of my cone is. Now when we do this, that means B ends up as 11 and 2 hundredths. So we know that B was 11 and 2 hundredths, or our height up here was 11 and 2 hundredths. Okay? So now from here, we can go ahead and plug this into our formula. Now remember, the formula to find the volume of a cone is 1/3 times pi, which remember, we're going to use 3 and 14 hundredths, times the radius squared, times the height. Okay? Now we're just plugging things in. We know that our radius was 5, so we're going to go ahead and rewrite this, and I'm actually going to rewrite it down below. So 1/3, 3 and 14 hundredths. Our radius we said is 5, so 5 squared, times the height, which we figured out through Pythagorean theorem, was 11 and 2 hundredths. From there, I'm just multiplying things out, and we should have ended up with 288 and 4/10 yards cubed. Got to make sure we have our label. So for number one, the volume of this cone after our Pythagorean theorem was 288 and 4/10 yards cubed. All right, guys, so let's look at question number 2. We're going to determine the volume of this cylinder. Now, one thing to remember is that the volume formula for a cylinder was the area of the base, which for us is 3 and 14 hundredths, which represents pi, times the radius squared, times the height. And we're just filling information in. Okay. Now, we know from our information that we're given that the diameter here is 4 and 8/10, but we also know that we don't want the diameter, we want half of that. So the first step you had to do was take 4 and 8/10 and divide it by 2, which left us with 2 and 4/10. So our radius up here is actually 2 and 4/10. So when we sub this in, we have 3 and 14 hundredths, which represents pi, times 2 4/10 squared times our height, which we were given as 7 9/10. From there, we just multiply this out. When we multiply it out, we get our volume as 142 9/10 inches cubed for our answer. Okay, guys, so let's look at question number 3. Question number 3 said that a cylindrical water pipe has a radius of 5 centimeters and a height of 7 centimeters. What's the volume of water it would take to fill the pipe? So this problem gave us a little bit of information. I'm going to change this to fill the pipe. So this problem gave us some information. It gave us what the radius was, so that's good. It gave us what the height was, and it also gave us that it was a cylinder. So we know with the cylinder, our formula, again, is 3 1400 because it's pi, times the radius squared, times the height. So again, we're just filling in what they gave us. They told us our radius was 5 centimeters, so we have 3 1400 times 5 centimeters squared. They told us that our height was 7 centimeters. So from here, we're just working this out. When you plug this into your calculator, you end up with 549 5/10 centimeters cubed as the volume of this pipe. So question number 4 says, the base of a cone shape. So right away they tell us something. They tell us that we're dealing with a cone. A cone-shaped glass has a diameter of 12 inches and is 18 inches tall. You decide to fill the glass to the very top with Dr. Pepper. What's the volume of Dr. Pepper that would fit in the glass? So again, they tell us some things. They tell us the diameter is equal to 12 inches. Okay. They tell us that it is 18 inches tall, and as we said before, they tell us it is a cone. So we know that if it's a cone, then our formula is 1/3 times pi, which we use 3 1400, times the radius squared times the height. Okay? So for us, this would mean that if the diameter is 12, we don't want to use 12. Remember, we want the radius. So the first step would be to divide our diameter in half, which makes it 6. So we know our radius should be 6. So we come back over here, and we have 1/3 times 3 1400 times the radius, which we found was 6 squared, times the height, which again they gave us in the problem as 18. When I work this one out, I get 678 2/10 inches cubed for my final answer. So let's go ahead and let's look over onto the back side of our paper. And on the back question, you were given certain pieces of information, but a key value was missing. So in this case, our missing measurement was the height we were trying to find. So it tells us some very valuable pieces of information. The first thing it tells us is that our shape was a cone. And that's important because it tells us the formula we're using. So our formula for a cone, remember, is 1/3 times pi, 3 1400, times the radius squared times the height. And we're just filling things in. And we know this is what the volume equals. Okay? So in this case, they've switched it up and gave us the volume. So again, we're just going to be plugging things in. So the first thing they tell us is the volume is 956. So I'm going to come over here to where I have this written, and I'm going to start filling things in. So 956 was my volume. From there, we know that 1/3 is still 1/3. That does not change. So it's still 1/3. We also know that pi doesn't change, so it's still 3 1400. Next comes the radius. They told us over here that our radius was 9 inches. So we're going to come back to our problem, and we're going to substitute that in. 9 squared. And then again, what's missing is our height. So h is what's missing. All right, so let's look at this and see what we would do. We did a problem like this in class, and if you remember on that problem, we started by combining all of this information. These are all normal, regular constants, or numbers, so we can go ahead and we can combine those. So if I take 1/3 times pi times 9 squared, what I end up with is 84 7800. Now remember, I still have h on this side that I have not done anything with. I also still have 956 on my left side that we haven't done anything with. From here, it's just a basic one-step equation. I know that if 84 and 78/100 is on the same side or right next to h. That's a coefficient. I know that's multiplication. We also know that the inverse of multiplying is to divide. So I should have divided both sides by 84 and 78/100. And again, we do that on both sides. So that's going to eliminate our 84 and 78/100 on the right side, meaning that's all that's left over there is h. That also leaves me with 11 and 3/10 on my left side. So what I have just figured out is that the height, so I'm going to come back up here to the blank, is 11 and 3/10, and I got to get my label as inches. Should have been my final answer. All right, guys, the last question on the quiz gave us, again, some information, but we were missing the radius. We had to work backwards to find the radius. It told us at the beginning that we're working with a cylinder, and that matters for our equation. So remember, the formula for a cylinder is that the volume equals the area of the base, which again is pi, times the radius squared, times the height. Now we're going to fill in what we know from our problem. So they gave us the volume of 1,570, so we're going to fill that in. 1,570 was the volume. That equals, now remember, pi is not changing, so we're going to keep that as 3 and 14/100. The radius we don't know yet, so we're going to leave that as r squared. And then we do know that the height up at the top is 5 centimeters, so we can bring that back down over here and put 5 into our equation. Okay? Now, we did a problem like this with Mr. Schrag in his video, and if you remember, we started by taking our 5, or the number for the height, and moving it to the other side. Now, we know the right side is all multiplication, so you guys can think about this. The inverse of multiplying is dividing, so we needed to divide our 5 over to the left side to remove it from the right side. So when I have 1,570 and I divide by 5, that leaves me with a pretty good number here, 314. So no decimals on this one, just 314. I still have, on my right side, pi, 3 and 14/100, times my radius, which we don't know yet, squared. So we're getting closer here. Now remember, the next step is to get rid of my pi. Again, this is multiplication, so we're going to divide both sides by 3 and 14/100. That will remove it from the right side, so that's gone. And when I divide on the left side, 314 divided by 3 and 14/100 is 100. So 100 is equal to, and the only thing left over here is r squared. So this is kind of similar to Pythagorean theorem in that we're left with a number squared. We know that the inverse of squaring a number is square rooting a number. So our next step and our final step would be to square root our 100 to get what r is by itself. So we know the square root of 100, or a number times itself to get 100, is 10, and we're left with 10 equals r. So I'm going to come back up here to where the radius is, and I'm going to write in my answer with the correct label. So radius is going to equal 10 centimeters. And there's our final answer for the last question on the quiz.